Howdy folks, Chief Meteorologist Nick Lilly here taking a look at the tropical update brought to you by the good folks at Pine Belt Gutters for August 15th of 2019. The good news is that things are sort of calmer in the tropical weather forecasting world today than they were yesterday. The bad news is at the end of the day that probably doesn't really matter. We'll explain why here coming up in a couple minutes. Showers, thunderstorms into the Gulf of Mexico here with lingering frontal boundary. Front didn't really help us out much. It's not a good cold front where it's cold behind it. It's just not quite as hot behind it for the northern Gulf Coast. Instead of feeling like 130, it feels like 100. It still feels like 100, but hey, we're not all melting. Down into the Caribbean, we've got some thunderstorm activity off to the south of Puerto Rico and just on to the west of the Greater and Lesser Antilles. For the most part, the Caribbean's been pretty quiet over about the last week or two. This is actually the first good thunderstorm activity they've had in a while. It's allowed the water to warm up, which isn't great, but we'll have to see if this doesn't help cool it back down a little bit, because I don't think we see anything out of this develop. There's just a little too much shear in here. You can see how the clouds, they're all just really booking in a kind of a west to east direction in here. That just kind of calves off the top of any thunderstorms that would develop and any tropical system that would try and develop. We've got one leftover wave here, another leftover wave here, and another soon-to-be leftover wave right here. This one coming off the African coast right now may try and hold together through the next couple of days, but as we'll see in the modeling, it's probably not going to have the greatest chance to stay alive. We've got one little wave right here, and by the way, let's go back. That wave that you just saw is actually kind of in here. Let me go forward here. Right there, and it just kind of lifts off to the north of Puerto Rico and the Greater Lesser Antilles. We're right now nosing with a big nose of higher pressure toward Florida and the Bahamas. If this stays put, it guides this wave right around the southern tip and then right off to the north and east on the other side of this little nose. So that would put it into the Gulf of Mexico. Well, the good news for us is that nose really pulls back as we head through the next couple of days, which allows this wave out here, if it so desires, to shift back off to the north and northeast. So you got high pressure over here, high pressure over here, and there's kind of an alleyway in between the two that would allow anything from the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, or the open Atlantic to kind of curlicue back off to the north and eventually to the north and east and away, thank goodness, from us. Now the question is there going to be anything out here? Well, I remember that first wave that I was talking about would be kind of right in here. There's a little bit of dryish air around there, but you've got a little nose itself of some more moist air. And again, this map, anywhere it's gray, that's where you don't have to worry about anything in terms of development because there's too much dry air, so we just gray it out. And if it gets so gray it turns brown, that's a lot of dry air. So we really don't have to worry anything about any development there. As we head through Sunday, later this week, again, that wave gets a little bit closer, but it's tough to kind of pick out in here because there's so much dry air. That little wave that was coming off the coast of Africa, you can see how it kind of falls apart here. As we head through Monday and into Tuesday, now it's kind of tough to see where is that wave that was coming. Well, part of it gets kind of ripped off and pushed off to the north. Another part of it actually does slide into the Gulf of Mexico. Because of that, we have another little piece of energy down here that gets kind of nosed a little further off to the west. This is the same one that yesterday we were talking about as getting into the central part of the Gulf of Mexico and maybe trying to organize itself. Here we are, what, about 8, 9, 10 days out, somewhere in that ballpark. That is a little far when you're talking about the tropics in terms of making a good forecast. But nevertheless, it's now showing it going into Mexico. This is completely normal, but kind of doesn't matter, right? This is the, hey, good news, things aren't quite as active. We now have nothing happening, a little wave, something going into Mexico, but it doesn't really matter because at 8 days out, forecasts aren't necessarily that great. So let's look at the same map from a different model. We've got more dry air around here. Here's that little wave. Notice the wave on our European model, by the time we get towards Sunday, is a little more together, a little more cohesive out here. This one actually makes it into the Gulf of Mexico as a wave. We've got showers and thunderstorms along the Gulf Coast associated with what's left over of another kind of little boundary in here. But because this wave gets into the Gulf of Mexico, Watch what happens with number 2 down here. Number 2 never really ends up doing anything or developing into anything at all, because that big ridge of high pressure, while it falls back off to the west, before it does so, the wave actually makes it into the Gulf, which noses everything kind of a little further back off to the west as high pressure up here kind of builds in and down to the southeast. A lot of moving parts when it comes to tropical weather. That's always the main push, the main thing that I'm always trying to explain to everybody that'll listen. Tons of moving parts. You're never going to see one model and have that one model mean much of anything at all, truly, especially beyond 5 days out. Even though people on social media like to share it all the time as gospel. Anyway, I know that's a roundabout way, and there's a lot of things that I just showed for today's tropical update from August 15th of 2019. But just know that the tropics are in general warming up. We're going to have a lot to talk about through the next couple of days, but there may be fluctuations each day as to what is going to happen and how active it will be. That's why it's important to watch this kind of every day, so that you have a good idea as a trend as we head through the end of August and into September, as things get much more active in the tropics, as they should, it being the peak of hurricane season. So again, there's a look at your tropical update brought to you by the good folks at Pine Belt Gutters for August 15th of 2019.